What is up, guys? It is Craig here for episode 4 of Fascinating Chess Positions. As you can see, I have a webcam that I found, so now you can see my face and also my dog Leechy in the background. It's going to be a great summer. So, here we have a position. Quite clearly, it comes from a Sicilian, and we have white to play here. Um, there's not going to be any crushing knockout blow. There's not going to be any super tactical sequence in the position. The point of this position is to try to come up with a plan or two or three or more, just like any variety of plans for white to play in this position. Because in the game, what happened was I played a move after 5 to 10 minutes of thinking that kind of worked out in the game, but it did not really have a plan behind it, and that could have easily made me drift into a worse position and get outplayed. So here, I think, is a critical moment to, if you want, pause your video and figure out different ways that white could play this position reasonably. All right. So I think I'm going to start out by showing you the move that I actually played in the game, which was knight f5. Damn, I have this on. I have notation on like play mode, so replay mode. So let's actually get rid of that. Honestly, now that I mean, if you guys would have paused your videos, I think it's okay to show the. Let's actually move me to this side. Um, does it even work? Nah. Let's move the notation just back to how is this gonna work? Yeah, let's do this. This is fine. Yeah. So we have the notation here, the board here. If you've paused, I think the paragraph that I wrote to annotate my game is probably one of the best annotations I've made. And one of my good grandmaster friends, Joshua Shang, has showed this game to his students and in class lessons countless of times because it is so rich. But I'm just going to today focus on this one position. And I wrote, well, on the previous move, I had already started looking for plans. And after about 2 to 3 minutes, I just played rook a d1 because I figured it can't be bad. And after b6, it is time to think about plans again. And so we have the three questions, as always. Where are the weaknesses for both me and my opponent? What is my worst place piece? And what is my opponent's plan? And so usually it's pretty good to start with identifying the weaknesses. And in this case, we can see, I guess in the white camp, we have this e5 f4 um, I guess configuration, like the dark squares are kind of weak. We have d6 as a weakness, b6 might be a weakness, and f7 is a weakness if this f file ever gets open. And so for our weaknesses, we realize that, okay, f4 is possible to get rid of our weakness on, I guess, like this f4 square. But then if f4, let's say, um, yeah, I'll show this on the board. So if f4 she takes f4, bishop takes f4, we can see that this e4 pawn is now also a weakness. So it's different things that we can consider in this position. And so on to the next question, what is black's plan? If you gave black 2, 3 moves in a row, I think it's pretty simple that he would just play bishop, not a7, bishop b7, queen c7, and then from there he could decide whether he wanted to play rook c8, or maybe even long castle, just to get his king to safety and then try going for something like h5, h takes g4. I keep making all these random arrows, but yeah, and try to go for like some sort of kingside attack or maybe like knight g6, bring the other knight to e5. But for now, black is still trying to develop his pieces in the development stage. Let's try to get rid of all these arrows. Yeah, so now that we've come up with the weaknesses, we think about what is our worst place piece? And our worst place piece right now is probably this bishop on g2. And the way, of course, that we would potentially activate this later on is by pushing e5. So if at some point, at any point, we could dislodge this knight from e5, that would help us deal with our worst place piece. Also, we could say this rook on f1, but after f4, that rook on f1 would be well placed, and that might also be a way of solving our worst place piece. Um, actually, a really creative answer to our worst place piece, and this does lead to, I think, like the second plan that we could come up with in this position. Or I mean, the numbers are arbitrary, but we could also say that the worst place piece, and it's not actually a piece, but it's a pawn, is this pawn on c2. And the reason that it's not, we could consider it the worst place piece is if we could play in one move c2 to c4, we absolutely would, and we would be very happy. And so this is the only thing that our first plan revolves around. And so if we wanted to come up with, a decent enough plan in this position, we can see. Actually, you can see just what I wrote here. We know what Black's plan is. Bishop b7, queen c7, castle queenside, and continue improving pieces. d6, b6, f7, weaknesses. f4 is the first thing to consider, but let's actually go through. So another thing we might try to do is expand on the queen side. A pawn on c4 would be very nice. We have to figure out how to make this work via backwards thinking. We would have to move this knight somewhere. Um, the best place for the knight would likely be e2 because from there we can go f4 and we can either go f4 and take on f4 with the knight, or from e2 we can go to like g3 and h5, something like that. And then okay, continue the backwards thinking. Knight wants to go to e2. We have to move our queen. Where do we want to move our queen? The best place for the queen is somewhere where it also just the place where it makes the most sense would be d2, where we also eye this f4 square, control. We're adding pressure on this d6 pawn, which is one of the weaknesses we mentioned before. The problem with queen d2 immediately is that we run into knight c4, of course. And so what move does that lead us to play? It leads us to play this move b3 to stop knight c4. Bishop b7, we continue with our plan, queen d2, queen c7, knight ce2, castle queenside, and c4. Here we have a very playable position. We have improved our position, which was the goal from the starting position that I showed you guys. And it'll be a game. As I said, it's a tame plan. It's not objectively best, but the point is at least White knows what he's doing here, and we are not playing without a point. The second move, and actually I would say this is the first plan because it's really the first move we should consider and analyze and really like evaluate, is this move f4. Because if we can play, if f4 is good, then it makes a lot of sense to just play it immediately. And f4 takes. The point is, and as I mentioned before when I was talking about this bishop on g2 being the worst place piece, is that we are putting pressure on e5, and our follow-up is we're going to want to put more pressure on e5 by playing knight f3 on the next move. So bishop b7, knight f3, following the plan of pressuring the knight on e5. And basically, when we remove this knight on e5, like, so we can continue down the line, queen c7, knight takes e5. Right now we take the knight, and it's just going to be replaced with the other knight. But the point is, like, now f7 is weak. So, for example, castling queenside is not possible because we will take on e5 and win f7. And now black's position starts becoming a little inconvenient. Because although we have this weak pawn on e4, and although our bishop on g2 is still stuck, we have this 2-on-1 on the king side. We have pressure on the f file. Black's king is stuck in the center and can't castle. b6 is still weak, and black's pieces are still kind of undeveloped. And so after something like bishop g7, knight e2, we have a plan of knight g3 to h5, as I've already drawn with arrows. We still have this plan available of b3 and c4 clamping down on the center. And here, white is definitely for choice. And so I think this is the move that I should have gone for in the game. I just did not understand that it was okay to be left temporarily with this bad bishop on g2 and this isolated pawn on e4. So I guess like despite black having this stronghold on the center right now with this knight on e5, white will be challenging this very soon. That is the crux of his plan. Knight f3, challenge the outpost on e5, and then try to get to the pawn on f7. Actually, if you can see after queen f2, all of our pieces are ideally placed, at least the ones that can participate, they're ideally placed to put pressure on the three weaknesses that we outlined at the start of the position. So this pawn on d6, we have this rook attacking it. This pawn on f7, we have the queen and the rook attacking it. Pawn on b6, we have the queen attacking it. And this bishop on f4 is participating too. It is indirectly attacking the f7 pawn because we're attacking the defender of the f7 pawn. All right. And for the last plan is actually very similar to what I just mentioned with f4 and try to undermine e5, except we just do it without playing f4. That is just this move knight f3 where we're trying to undermine this knight on e5. And I say I like this move quite a bit. It shows deep understanding of the weaknesses in the position and creativity in exploiting them. It's possible that f4 is better than knight f3, but knight f3 is very creative. And actually, let's read back to what I said with knight f3. You start by considering the move knight f3, which is very natural to challenge the knight on e5. If it doesn't move, I snap it off, and suddenly b6 is weaker due to the knight on d7 having taken back. And if the knight goes to g6, then suddenly I'm free to push e5, as I mentioned earlier, which is why the thinking of noticing or recognizing our worst place piece is very important. And after knight f3, knight g6, we would be able to play e5, open the diagonal, and this would crush black. All of this is logical and creative thinking, none of which crossed my mind during the game. So I played a move different than all three of these moves, and we'll look at that later. But let's look at knight f3 right now. So knight f3, I would say probably bishop b7 and queen c7 are both moves that black wants to play. But let's look at first if black declines the knight trade with knight g6. We'll play e5, and we will simply just break through in the center. We can clearly see if anything takes on e5, we simply take back with the knight. Opens up the diagonal for our bishop on g to attack to rook na8, and we will be crushing. So black closes the position with d5, and we simply take on d5 and go knight d4. e6 is a threat, knight c6 is a threat, bishop takes d5 is a threat, knight f5 is in the air, everything's in the air, f4 is in the air, and f7 might be weak, and none of black's pieces are playing. Simply white is down a piece, but he is winning here. Sample line might be something like this. And yeah, we win back the piece with a crushing endgame. And if something like queen c7 or bishop b7, we will simply take on e5 and then pressure this pawn on a4. Same thing goes with queen c7 takes. We're going to put the queen on e3, pressure the pawn on b6, but probably before we do that, because queen e3 runs into knight c4, we're going to go b3 and then queen e3 next. And at any point, we can choose to play f4. This is an option at our disposal, and then suddenly f7 also will become weak. So all three of these moves, if I had played them, it would have been a good think during the game, and it would have been um, it would have been like a nice thing for us, and we would have had a plan for the upcoming game. Instead, I played this move, knight f5, and I wrote, this seems like the type of move that usually someone would attach an exclamation to because, like, wow, it's a strong move. You move the knight to where it can be taken. Doesn't seem like it can be taken, or it doesn't seem like we can move it there, but we move it there anyway. We're attacking the pawn. Strong move. But honestly, like, I made this move more out of frustration, as I wrote here, because I wasn't able to find a plan about improving our pieces or what I wanted out of the position. And so eventually I just decided, screw it, I'm going knight f5. If my opponent takes, then finally, like, I have a plan in the position. I'm down a piece, but at least I know I have full compensation. I'm opening up the center, and finally I know what I'm playing for. The problem is if black doesn't take it with queen c7, I'm still stuck for a plan. I still don't know what I'm doing. d6 is adequately defended, and I was planning to play knight g3 to go to h5, but it's not so clear that the knight really does anything here. It kind of looks nice. It blocks the king side so that black isn't ever getting h5 in. But after any move, castles, b5, bishop e7, it's really not clear, again, like what my plan is or what I'm trying to do. And I would have to take another long think. And it kind of feels like I am the one being outplayed here with white. Fortunately for me, my opponent took on f5 without much think, and I was extremely happy to see this move. Like, despite being down a piece now, my play is very natural. Rook b8, f4, natural, just opening as many lines as possible. Takes. And here black is the one who has to be more careful than white, because I can make any reasonable move with white, and I will keep my compensation. But one wrong move from black, and black could be screwed very easily. And so that's actually what happened pretty soon. So queen c7, black's trying to activate the queen and get in bishop b7. Bishop b7 immediately is not possible because that hangs the a6 pawn. So queen c7, the point is actually to try to play bishop b7 and recapture with the queen. But unfortunately, that runs into knight d5, check, bishop e3, queen c4. And if you wanted to pause your video again, um, I don't know if you saw it in the notation, but here's another moment where I came up with a fantastic move this game. It is the only move to be winning in this position. I think it's the only move to be better. Um, Pause your video if you want. I'm assuming you've paused by now if you wanted to. And that move is in order to avoid the queen trade and keep the initiative in the position, I played this move rook d3. And the idea is if I move the queen away, black is simply fine. Moves develops the bishop to b7, moves the queen back to c8, black is totally fine. But now after rook d3, suddenly, first of all, if black takes, I simply take back. I'm going to have a deadly discovered check on somewhere by moving this bishop, probably just d4, maybe g5 or something. And also this rook's coming into c1, knight c7 is in the air. It's simply not possible to take this rook. And if bishop b7, now after b3, queen c8, I have this move rook c3. Suddenly I'm getting my rook on this c file, and black is again screwed. And in the game, my opponent, not knowing what to do, ended up taking this pawn. And I had the opportunity to win here with a very nice move, bishop d4, with a double threat of b3, rook a1, trapping the queen, and also, let's say, some random move, bishop b7. If you wanted to pause your videos very quickly again, the idea is takes, queen sack takes, check, and f6 checkmate. And so that is the double threat. Both threats are not stoppable, and so after bishop d4, I would have won the game. Instead, I played knight b4. White's still better, but it's a very up and down game afterwards with a lot of rich moments, but that is beyond the scope of this video, and eventually my opponent, with his fighting spirit, did win the game. My opponent, Razvan, my teammate from UT Dallas. Uh, God bless Razvan, my favorite Canadian, maybe. Actually, I might have more favorite Canadians, but he was a homie. Good. Hats off to him, I guess, for winning this game. I had a lot of fun playing this game. And yeah, despite losing to him, I ended up getting my first Grandmaster norm later in the tournament. And so all fond memories for me. And definitely a game that I learned a lot from. Specifically, I mean, it got very tactical later in the game, but those are not the moments I learned the most from. It was moves, I guess, 11, 12, 13 that I learned the most from in this game. Just like what plans I missed from the position, the subtle thinking that I think a strong grandmaster would have come up with that I did not during the game, and how I can improve on that in the future. So that is it from me, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time.